I mean, I think they can, like in the limit they can fully solve software engineering. If you look at like the quality of thought, like if you look at each agent and each problem that they solve or each problem that they don't solve, you can actually see the conversation that the agent goes through with itself trying to solve the problem. And I think that like it's good enough now where like just reading it, it's kind of like almost starting to look like my thought process when I'm coding, to the point where like I don't see why you can't just like fully basically eliminate the actual implementation work of software. Obviously, in very large, complicated settings, like it's going to take time to get there, but I don't see why in the limit we can't like basically fully solve it. I mean, like it definitely was better. I think that like our agent is like definitively better than Cloud Code. We'll have benchmarks at the end of the week showing the top agent and using the cloud models, using the model that it specifies, and then using like a cheaper model just to like show everyone like where it kind of stacks as like an agent and as a model. But it's like way too expensive to run. So we kind of cut it off like halfway through. So we don't have like the full thing on that, but it is better, like slightly better with the cloud models, of course. So basically, you create a class of shares that has 21 million shares in that like specific class. 49% of the profit of the company is allocated towards that 21 million. As like the actual number of alpha tokens grow, um, like you kind of like issue more of these shares in line with the token growth. So right now, for example, it's probably like I think 2.1 million tokens circulating, so you have 2.1 million shares. And similar to how every block there's new shares, at the end of like every week or every day, like that's like a lawyer question, you issue more shares to kind of match that same pace of growth. Like get up, check the miner messages, like usually like argue with the miners a bit on Discord, and then I try to like go for breakfast every morning. That's like the one thing I do. I'll like just go down the street and like plan out kind of like what feature we're working on for the day, and then just come back and code, I guess. And like eat, sleep, repeat.
Welcome to the Ventura Labs podcast. Today, we're joined by Shakeel, the founder of Ridges, Subnet 62. We cover how open sourcing miner code, accelerated agent quality, upcoming incentive upgrades, the vision for what a Ridges product would look like, Shakeel's novel Waterloo hiring funnel, and how he's moving to implement a first of its kind alpha to equity design, all aimed at one goal: making human coders obsolete. Now, back to Shakeel with the 61st Ventura Labs podcast. All right, Shakeel, the subnet owner of Ridges, Subnet 62, which is currently number 2, I believe, on the charts. We've come a long way in a few months. How you doing, man?
Good man, how are you? Good to be back.
Yeah, I'm doing great, man. Good to talk to you again. So last time I talked to you, you didn't even have your open minor competition where the code was public. How is that going for you so far? From your perspective, how's the transition been?
Uh, it's been pretty crazy. I think it's been like probably like the best decision that we made, like just as a subnet, just opening everything up. But it's been interesting. I think that it actually worked like mostly as intended, where like people are kind of like collaborating as well as competing. Like they're obviously trying to get better, but they're taking everyone else's ideas and kind of putting them together.
And then last time you were on here, I asked you what advice you had for your younger self. Your advice was move faster. I think it is safe to say, since you've been on here last time to now, you've been moving the fastest in Bittensor, and I think that's undeniable at this point. Looking back on it, how do you think your younger self would have felt about these last few months?
Uh, not much really. It was, I guess, just like could keep going faster. If you look at our GitHub commits, they've actually not been as fast these last couple of weeks as they were in the couple of weeks predecessing. So still some way to go.
Okay, so you still got to move faster. Then is what I'm hearing.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, what does a typical day in your life look like now, man?
Um, I mean, it's pretty much just a subnet like all day. Um, like get up, check the miner messages, like usually like argue with the miners a bit on Discord, and then I try to like go for breakfast every morning. That's like the one thing I do. I'll like just go down the street and like plan out kind of like what feature we're working on for the day, and then just come back and code, I guess. Like eat, sleep, repeat.
Okay, a big thing that a lot of people are talking about for you guys is product. What
Yes. Yeah.
is a product gonna look like for you guys?
So, I mean, the first one, like, I think the most obvious one, and it kind of really fits in with like well with the way the agents are structured right now, is something similar to Claude Code. So you kind of like you download like this app that we provide you. It connects to your code base. So your code is here. We have like the app right beside it, like almost like a little ChatGPT interface. And you ask your Ridges agent to solve a problem for you, and then you can kind of see all the decisions that it's making, how it's kind of thinking through it, and eventually it gives you the final code. And so it's like ChatGPT, but like you get to see all the steps for how it thought and what it did, what files it's reading, based on what it's reading, what it's seeing, that kind of stuff.
How do you, in a product like that, since you guys just benchmark for solving problems, how do you
Mhm.
account for human preferences in design?
So that's like one major difference that we have to make. Like it's like an incentive mechanism upgrade away. If you look at Sweetbench, there's like some degree of like of that where like depending on the kind of the problem statement, it can be very descriptive and you can kind of get like a taste on what's needed. But at the end of the day, it either solves the problem or it doesn't. And so it kind of lacks that. Our main thing is that like as soon as we have a product out, that's going to become like a core driver into the incentive mechanism, where it's not just going to be like just some benchmark. It's actually going to be based on real user feedback. So for example, like you have like this model, and when the user asks a question, you can swap out like what model that it's using, or you can even run two models at the same time and let the user pick which one it prefers. And then we could do rev share to miners based on that, or like adjust the emissions based on like actual usage stats, like what top agent do the customers prefer. And I think it becomes like especially important when you get like kind of to this point where we're saturating the benchmarks, everyone's coming like neck and neck. The way you kind of want to like, because we don't want to kind of move from like this system where we have the incentive mechanism driving them to get better to us now subjectively deciding which one's better. Instead, I think you kind of want to integrate the real world data into the incentive mechanism. So you kind of make like making it more palatable to what users prefer a part of the incentive mechanism that kind of gets you a reward instead of just being like a total benchmark score.
And swapping out models and rev share, how many
Mhm.
different models would you have on the platform for users to choose from? Because right now you just reward the top model.
Yes. I mean, so I think that we wouldn't, the user wouldn't see any of this. In the background, like let's say you have like if you look at right now the top agents, they're all like roughly 80%, the top four guys. So if you're presenting this to a user, you take the top four guys and just randomly select one and then log which one you selected and then whether or not the user liked the result. And then so you kind of like you still do winner takes all, but you incorporate data from like what the user preferred on the actual thing to like determine who gets the reward instead of just a pure score.
And is this the incentive mechanism upgrade that's coming next? Is based off this user feedback?
No, there's I think two, three more incentive mechanism upgrades on the way before like we have the full product out. The one that's coming this Friday, I won't say too much about it, but basically like the question is it just good at Sweetbench or is it good like across the board? And I think that like this answers like the is it good across the board question and kind of like really like takes it from us manually reviewing the agents and make sure they're not optimizing for one benchmark to like legitimately like are you a better agent kind of thing.
Do you do this through synthetic benchmarks and you guys create synthetic problems so it's impossible for them to have seen them before?
Not quite. So there's basically like a bunch of different benchmarks. We're doing like mixed benchmarks. So we're running on a combination of like Sweetbench and another one called Polyglot, where now they're coding in six languages. But the agent actually runs on both problems. To be the top agent, you have to be the best agent at both benchmarks, not just one benchmark. So if you're really optimized towards Sweetbench and you do miserably on Polyglot, and someone else is a little bit worse than you on Sweetbench, but they're like also like keeping their performance in Polyglot, the second one is probably a better agent. So you basically need to like top both leaderboards to stay as top miner.
Is this where you see the near term future being just stacking these different benchmarks?
Near-term future is in the next few weeks, yes, yeah. But really like until we get a product out, and that's like when you have like the definitive data for who's better.
Okay. So
Yes.
for the next few weeks, that's the incentive mechanism. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the product you said is going to be like Claude Code. Do you anticipate just having one product or multiple products, like a suite of different offerings?
So I'm a little bit unclear on this. I think that like there's something to be said about like simplicity. Of like the product interface, especially like if we're integrating its data into the incentive mechanism, it becomes very complicated if you have like a suite of different products and like they're all kind of feeding into the incentive. I think that like it'll depend on how the market reacts to it is the honest answer. But eventually we kind of want to go to like one product that's like closer to like a PM tool than it is to like a programmer extension, where you have like a someone that is technical but is like a product manager at a company, kind of supervising the agents as they would supervise their engineers. So closer to linear and Slack than like than an IDE like Cursor.
Okay. And then Shoots said they serve, I think the exact number was 99.7% of the inference for
Mhm.
ridges.
Right.
Do you view this as a problem, being dependent on Shoots almost in that regard, or do you not view it that way?
I don't think so. For a couple of reasons. I mean, like we're scaling up our Targon usage as well. But I mean, like we've worked with Shoots a lot. We've gone from like evaling like maybe like 15 agents a day to like 1,000 a day right now. And they've like kind of worked with us to like scale up the models that agents are using. They're pretty responsive. We actually have a page on our dashboard where we show like the inference error rates. And sometimes like when there's a big volume of agents, there'll be like a spike and it comes right back down. Like there's only been like one or two instances where it was sustained, and that was actually an error on our side, in terms of the inference. So I'm pretty confident that they'll scale up. I think that like as we get the product and like the revenue starts rolling in and we can actually start like paying Shoots like direct like a lot of revenue so that their tokenomics become a lot more sustainable, it kind of becomes like a positive flywheel where their miners can continue to scale up with us.
And how much does the underlying language model used by the agents matter? Like, if you switch out that language model, how big is the
Mhm.
difference in performance?
It does make a difference. So we kind of like we want the agents using cheaper models, obviously, and getting the most performance out of it. Um, there is like a difference where like some of like the open source models, for example, are more like tuned towards coding, and that makes a difference. And so like we've had times where we've banned some models that were very, very good at coding, but for example, took a very long time. A good example of this is like called Kimi K2 Instruct. Very good coding model. Performance dropped from like 44 to 34%. And then like a day and a half later, they were back at like 44%. So it does make a difference, but we kind of like account for that so that we can like kind of use these models at a good price in prod.
And I know you guys have ran an experiment using the Claude model. It,
Yes.
do you want to talk about the performance difference you saw there? Or,
Yeah. Sure, I can. Yeah. I mean, like it definitely was better. I think that like our agent is like definitively better than Cloud Code. We'll have benchmarks at the end of the week, kind of showing the top agent and using the cloud models, using the like the model that it specifies, and then using like a cheaper model just to like show everyone like where it kind of stacks, as like an agent and as a model. Um, but it's like way too expensive to run. So we kind of cut it off like halfway through. Um, so we don't have like the full thing on that, but it is better, like slightly better with the cloud models, of course.
and it being too expensive to run, you said it was like 380 times more expensive than
Yeah.
your current inference costs.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you view that as being dependent towards this cheap compute subsidized by Bittensor, being Targon, Chutes, those compute subnets? Is there
Mm.
a way to bring down costs without just using subsidized compute, essentially?
I don't think it matters because if you do the math on it, like even if we were to pay full pop on Open Router, our margin is still like north of like 70%. So it's like at the like 20, that's like at the same pricing as our competitors. Um, so it's completely sustainable in the sense.
And those competitors have negative margins from what you know about it.
Massively negative gross margins. Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I mean, their model is basically like the whole bet of like all these companies is that okay, well the models are going to get better every year. Bet on the models getting better, and therefore don't build like a big agent layer because a year from now you're going to have this new soda model that's going to beat your agent layer plus today's model because tomorrow's model is just that much better. But that comes at the cost of like two things. Number one, it's a very big assumption that they're going to get better at coding. I think the models right now are already pretty much good enough at it. And number two is that like you need to basically use the most expensive model at all times if your whole bet is that it's the model that kind of brings you out ahead. And so that means that they're basically just using the most expensive state-of-the-art model at all times. Um, and like the real kind of like Achilles heel of this is that okay, well if someone could do it at a price like with like last year's model, for example, or like the model from 6 months ago, that's like much cheaper, that's open source, then you're kind of stuck. But their whole bet is that like basically the model is the main part and the agent is like a thin part on top, whereas we're doing the opposite, where the agent is a very thick part and the model is a very thin part under it.
Do you anticipate adding judgment in the contest to where minimizing compute cost or inference cost is rewarded?
100%. I think that comes later down the line. The first one to do is to minimize latency and like kind of make it like a very smooth user experience. So I mean, like for example, right now, like it does take a bit of time to run these questions. Still less than I think that like the competitors give themselves, but in production, like nobody's waiting 30 minutes for the agent to get back to you. You need to like kind of get that down to like 10 seconds, 15, like maybe like a minute at most.
OpenAI's deep researcher takes about 30 minutes or so. I think that's a
Terrible UX. I
relatively
think
popular tool.
a bit, yeah. But I think that like even in my personal usage, I'm like very, very put off by it. I feel like I would integrate a lot of these tools a lot more if I could get it to be fast. And I think that like you can kind of like it's okay. I think we can build like the better agent, and then you kind of want to like take this incentive mechanism and throw it at the next problem. And I think latency is like, at least in my mind, like a very big one that's like important to like nail in terms of like how nice it feels to use a product.
So you think basically intelligent, how good the model is number one. And then number
Mhm.
two is speed. And then number three would be cost.
Yes, especially because our margins are so high. We can kind of have like some breathing room on cost. There are actually people that are working towards this. For example, like I think about a week and a half ago, there was a very interesting agent that did like this thing where they had like five baby agents. So kind of like imagine it as if you have like soldiers doing recon. The agents, their whole job was to figure out like where in the code base to edit. So imagine like you had five guys that kind of go out and they come back and report back to home base and they kind of like put all their intel together. And now imagine you invent the radio. So now like these guys can basically like phone home and then the home base can basically phone the other guys that are still out and kind of give them like intel on what's going on. Did you get what I'm saying? Like it's kind of like shared intelligence. Someone did that with agents, where like the agents then send the data that they find as they're like doing their research back to home base, that then sends it to all the other agents that are still looking around at the code base. So stuff like that is like, for example, and that gave him like a huge performance jump, because he wasn't timing out. Basically, the agent was finishing the problem in time. We cut them off after like 30 minutes. Stuff like that. That I think like people definitely can come up with like optimizations that can make it very fast.
And in terms of the problems you can solve, what is the scope of like how big a problem could be? Like, could you just prompt it and say make a full stack website in one prompt and your agents one shot that?
I think eventually, yes. Right now, we're kind of training them to like optimize to like solve each thing very, very well. So if you look at the speed bench problems, they're pretty scoped down. Like, okay, do this, and then like they do that end to end and make sure they get that right. They don't break anything else and they fix it. But yes, eventually, like I think sooner than later, you can kind of like take these and just stack them on top of each other, kind of like the original vision, where like you kind of solve the end-to-end problem, one shot prompt, and that's the eventual like kind of thing we want to go to, where like you have a product manager tool, you say, okay, I want this website that can do this. It creates like a bunch of tasks, and then like each task is picked up by an agent that kind of like works together, setting up the database, setting up the website, setting up the backend, and kind of like putting them all together, debugging itself if like anything goes wrong, that kind of stuff.
What do you think the limit is to how good these agents can be?
I mean, I think they can like in the limit they can fully solve software engineering. If you look at like the quality of thought, we have like if you look at each agent and each problem that they solve or each problem that they don't solve, you can actually see the conversation that the agent goes through with itself trying to solve the problem. And I think that like it's good enough now where like just reading it, it's kind of like almost starting to look like my thought process when I'm coding, to the point where like I don't see why you can't just like fully basically eliminate the actual implementation work of software. Obviously, in very large, complicated settings, like it's going to take time to get there, but I don't see why in the limit we can't like basically fully solve it.
And this is with the current level of LLMs. You believe it's already
I
possible
think
to be
so.
solved.
Yes. Especially because they can kind of critique themselves. They can run their own stuff now and like make sure that it works reliably, that kind of stuff.
And you guys run everything in a sandbox for these miners. What are the types of tools that they have at their disposal that they can use?
We restrict them quite a bit. So they basically only have like two points of access to the internet. Whereas like a lot of agents now actually have like full access to the internet. But this is just because like we don't, it's like too much of a surface area to stop miners from exploiting. Um, Basically they get one lifeline to the internet where they can ask like an AI model for an answer, which is like the main use. And the other one is access to what's called an embedding model, which is basically like taking some piece of content and turning it into a vector. Um, And this is basically useful, for example, because like if you want to compare how similar two files are, you can like, for example, turn them both into vectors and do like cosine similarity, that kind of stuff. Beyond that, the sandbox is like free reign for the agent. It's actually like almost like a product within itself, the sandbox, where the agent can do whatever it wants without kind of like messing up the validator machine that it's running on. Um, but that's the only thing that they have. And then every other tool that they want to use is up to the agent to build for themselves. For example, like reading files in the sandbox, like for example, like determining how to like compress the context that they're providing the LLM so that the request isn't too big, that kind of stuff. That's all in the agent.
And so the point of access to the internet, is it the same as when I use ChatGPT with the search function? Is it the same type of indexing there?
No, way more limited. There's no internet access except to ask like a model for an answer. There is no internet access.
When you say ask a model for an answer, what does that mean
Yes.
exactly?
In the same way that when you ask ChatGPT, it kind of gives you back an answer. You can do this as well for whatever models that you're using that are running on like Shoots or Targon, where like you basically pass a request to the LLM and the LLM gives you like a response. And then it's up to your agent what to do with that response, how to validate it, applying the code, that kind of stuff.
So you don't even allow the agent itself to go index the web.
Nothing. No open access. Our agents are way more constrained than all the agents that you use day to day. And like, we will obviously take these constraints off in our product once we've like vetted the agent code and built our own tooling around it. But within their sandbox, these results are coming from times where like the average inference time is about 9 seconds. Sometimes because the queries are long, they get timed out after 30 minutes, and like a lot of these questions are failing at like because of timeout. They have no access to the internet. If they try to optimize like for any repo or like kind of like do anything to do with like a repo where they know there's like a problem in the repo and they're like structuring the agent to account for that, ban all that kind of stuff. We basically want to like um make sure that we're not deluding ourselves on the performance of these agents. And the way we do that is basically like put as many handcuffs as we can on them. And like, so, okay, like given this now, solve the problem. So it's just pure like performance.
Which handcuffs do you think if you took off would boost the performance the most?
For sure, web search. There's so much context on the internet. Like even when I'm coding, I'll like look at Stack Overflow or I'll ask like another model for like context, stuff like that. Where like if you were able to search the internet and kind of like look at blogs about it, look at, for example, like previous times people have ran into the same problem and how they solved it, it gives you like a lot more ideas on how to solve a problem that the LLM might not have. In fact, if you look at like Codex, if you look at like ChatGPT now, they actually use this themselves, where like the agent will sometimes search the internet and use that like for their answers.
And then you personally, in your personal web development,
Mhm.
what's your vibe code tool of choice?
Claude Code. I love Claude Code.
Claude Code. When do you
Yeah.
think Ridges will replace Claude Code entirely for you personally?
I mean, hopefully not more than a couple months from now. I don't think that we're too far. There's a lot of built things to be built around the agents to make them like usable in like this product setting, but we're working on that actively at this point.
In building out a product compared to building out a subnet, it's a different challenge. Do you view it as harder? What's more difficult about building a product than building a subnet?
Um, I mean, like, so a subnet is very much based on. So obviously we worked a lot on like the user experience of like making it easier for miners to join, making it easy for them to compete, making it easy for them to like kind of like see what they can do to make their agents better. But it's most of the time is spent on incentives, planning out a new feature, figuring out how it's going to get exploited, how do we integrate it into the system properly. And there's like a very clear answer for that because you deploy it, either it gets broken or it doesn't, and they'll break it pretty quick. With a product, it's very different because it's almost like uncharted territory. You got to kind of like figure out what the user wants to see, what they respond to well, and you can use data towards this, but it's like a lot more creative work in terms of like whereas with a subnet, you're kind of like narrowing down the scope of where it can break. With a product, you're trying to like expand the scope of how they can use it effectively, especially for a product like this. That like the most innovative kind of like interface so far has just been like chat to a bot. Um, I think there's a lot of work to be done there in terms of like creative exploration and stuff like that. That's like we haven't done before. We'll figure it out, I think, but we haven't done it before.
Do you think it's possible to be able to put the product development on the miners?
I've heard this idea. It seems interesting. I kind of want a bit more control for it for now, especially if you have like one unified product. I think the thing to do is to kind of like I said, like integrate the product's feedback as it relates to their agent back to them. So for example, like like using the actual metrics of usage and like how often the users close out the window, how often they actually like accept the model's response if it's for your agent into the incentive mechanism, where your score is like based on like user data and kind of like feed that in really tightly into the incentive without letting them kind of like edit the code that the user sees at the end.
Your subnet used to be very black boxed, very not open in terms of what the miners were doing. Do you
Mhm.
think you'll ever return to that state? Say if you got a super popular product, do you think you'll ever return there?
No, I don't think so. I think that like just kind of letting this collaboration thing happen is the only way like for something like this to, at least in our case, beat someone more centralized. Because I don't want a situation where each kind of miner is trying to like reinvent the wheel, especially like right now in particular with AI agents doing code, it's a race. Like the race is on. So I don't see it like that. There is a question of like how do you protect the IP? And our answer for that right now isn't the most robust. It's basically just like to build a final polished product, you need a company. If you're to build a company around our IP that you're not allowed to use, we'd sue you. But I feel like there has to be like a better answer there than just suing. But no, I'm like pretty committed to like keeping it open.
And in terms of speed of this R&D, you guys got to 80%, I think over 80% on
Yeah.
the SUI benchmark.
Mhm.
How does that stack up against these competitors in terms of timelines? Because you did that in a couple months.
It's pretty crazy. Yeah. I think we're probably like the fastest ever to like grow like this in like an open way. Um, I think that like if this, we're still running the full benchmark. Every time we run the benchmarks as a new top agent, we have to start running them again. But I think if these benchmarks hold and we stay like similar to our performance, we're probably soda or very basically like touching it at this point. Um, yeah, I think it stacks up as pretty quick.
How do you feel being able to say that? You're state of the art in one of the hottest sectors in all of AI right now.
I would feel nothing. It basically only matters if people pay first.
Okay. All right. Well, you had a very I don't know how to put this, new idea, very revolutionary. You're the first one I ever heard say it, and that was alpha to equity conversions. You talked about this in your weekly uh, open mics that you do, open Q&As. What is this idea? How's it going to work?
So the core idea is that like you can basically purchase equity in the actual company for a very favorable rate by using alpha. And the idea here is that like there's a bunch of problems to be solved. The first is that like with buyback and burn, you're kind of relying on my goodwill as a subnet owner to take this revenue, to report it honestly, and to buy back my token and burn it. I think that so there's the one issue of like okay, kind of like giving the alpha holders and the miners like access to like the upside for the product that they've created, but it's reliant on me. So we kind of want to eliminate that. The second one is that like I think if our margins are this low, um, or if our margins are this high, you kind of want to like reward everyone with direct exposure to the profit, but in a way that like doesn't hurt the company. So you don't want to take all your revenue and burn it because you do. It's better at this stage to kind of like take that revenue and reinvest it into like the actual product and its growth. You also have the problem that like, especially for an early stage company, even though we'll have like a bunch of revenue, the emissions are very high across the Bittensor network. And so the structural demand that you'll create by using revenue is a lot lower than the structural demand that already exists for these companies. There's a lot of funds that are willing to invest like massive money into these companies, into their equity. They kind of want to buy pieces of these companies at very high valuations that are not constrained by like some of subnets or like any detail dynamics. And so I was kind of thinking about all these things, and I was like, okay, how do I take like all this structural demand and like integrate it into the alpha token in a way that's like sustainable and actually makes sense? And so yeah, that's like basically my idea. You let people basically use the alpha to purchase equity at favorable rates, and not just any equity. It'll be like a special class of equity that receives like 49% of all the profit made by the company.
Okay. When you say favorable rates,
Yeah.
what does this structure look like? Is it alphas 1-to-1 to shares? How do you anticipate this looking like? You said you could get preferential shares with dividends as high as
Yeah.
49%. What are more specifics here?
Okay. So basically you create a class of shares that has 21 million shares in that like specific class. 49% of the profit of the company is allocated towards that 21 million. As like the actual number of alpha tokens grow, um, like you kind of like issue more of these shares in line with the token growth. So right now, for example, it's probably like I think 2.1 million tokens circulating, so you have 2.1 million shares. And similar to how every block there's new shares, at the end of like every week or every day, like this is like a lawyer question, you issue more shares to kind of match that same pace of growth. You can purchase these shares on open market, but it's at a very, very high rate. So either you're like a venture fund and you want to have access to like these dividends in this cash flow machine, and you pay us like let's say like $1,000 per share, or you buy an alpha and you use that alpha to purchase the share. And so obviously it's just like another form of payment. The company on our end either receives like $1,000 per share or whatever it is, if the company wants to like actually just pay us that money and then that's cash that we can use for OpEx, or an alpha holder has basically paid for a share in our company using alpha. And that way we get to grow our treasury in like a sustainable way as well. Because as a subnet owner, we only get like I think about 9%, or it depends on how much tau is being emitted to the pool. But like obviously we want a lot more exposure to our alpha than we're getting right now. Um, and what this also creates is like basically there's a lot of funds that are not allowed to like that wouldn't be allowed to invest in alpha because it's very new, because it's crypto. Their mandate doesn't allow them, but they can touch equity. And so this creates like an arbitrage opportunity where basically like all these crypto funds that can basically deploy into this can now buy the alpha, which is a lot more demand than revenue could ever provide. They can use that to then purchase shares in the company and then sell that equity on like a effectively a liquid secondaries market to these funds that want direct equity exposure. And in this manner, we can basically raise like a ton of money without having to like constantly raise from VCs. It also like kind of like creates a lot more structural demand for the alpha token because it basically will come to mirror what the equity valuation of the company is, rather than like any sort of like root prop selling pressure stuff like that. It doesn't really matter if you're like taking that and getting like a huge profit by buying like equity, like profit in the sense that like the valuation of the equity is much higher than the alpha. And it also creates like for alpha holders, you basically get like an arbitrage opportunity because you can then redeem for the equity and sell the equity at a markup to these other companies that these funds that want to buy it. Um, it allows like the like actual alpha holders to directly receive dividends. Except it's not like kind of like crossing afoul of all these laws where we're not like basically taking these rewards and kind of like dropping them across all these users. Like on chain or whatever, who we don't know who they are. These are like KYC entities that have basically purchased shares in the company that are receiving dividends the same as any regular company does.
Yeah, that's interesting because then the dividends would also just be in US dollars too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. I don't know if you have the answer to this yet, but in terms of technical implementation,
Mhm.
the redeeming the alpha for the equity, would this look like burning the alpha and then receiving shares of equity? What do you
No,
think?
it's not a redemption. You basically are using the alpha for a purchase. In the same way that I can use dollars for a purchase, I'm just purchasing shares with alpha. And so the company
Mm,
gets to keep the alpha. So we get to increase our exposure to the alpha as well. But there's no redemption. It's not a burn. It's not a one-to-one burn. You're just purchasing it with this form of payment, which is the alpha.
interesting. Okay. And then my next question is, as you grow, do you anticipate adding other subnets to do supplementary tasks for you guys as some other subnets have done?
As in, like, would we open more subnets?
Yeah, like would you open a compute subnet to provide the compute for what you're doing at Bridges?
No, I don't think I'm smart enough to run multiple at a time. Nor do I have enough hours in a day. Maybe if I get better at management, but like, I don't think that's any time down the line.
Okay. And then you're famous for running a team of interns. What
Mhm.
does your hiring process look like out of this Waterloo funnel you've created?
Um, so I basically realized that like I can pay more than Canadian companies and less than American companies and capture like all these market of like cracked Waterloo interns that are good enough to go to the States, but for whatever personal reasons can't or don't want to. And then I basically just put it on Waterloo Works. I got like 1,000 applications, and then I just read all their GitHubs, and then kind of reach out from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
What would you say has been your biggest challenge of the last few months?
Um, I think it's probably like keeping everything stable. We've been like pushing like so I'm very big on like pushing out updates a lot of the time. But like unfortunately like this comes with like some instability in the system where like a lot of time miners are unable to get evaluated. Sometimes there's unfair situations where there is like a genuinely better agent that because the system is down or because like we're like sending too many requests and haven't scaled up on our side fast enough, they're not evaluated and don't get like a mission in time. Which is obviously unfair to them. I try not to set precedents because it's a very dangerous precedent to set, but I do like kind of compensate people out of my owner wallet from time to time when it like makes sense to for this. But I think stability is definitely the biggest one, like keeping everything stable. We've built a lot of tools around it, but we could do a much better job at that, I think.
In terms of your company structure right now, are you the 100% equity owner?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then if you fast forward 6 months from now or however many months from now, you have a working product. What would you say is like the benchmark to where you're like, we have achieved making human coders obsolete?
Um, I mean, I think the real benchmark of that would just be usage. Like if we get to that point, people would just stop coding pretty fast. And like you kind of see it just reflected in the jobs market, but you'd kind of know before then. I think like I'd be able to tell when like I don't need to have a team of interns anymore because I can just use the product.
Okay. How quickly do you think you can catch the competitors in this space, the cursors of the world, the windsurfs, the Claude Code,
Mhm.
in terms of revenue generated? I think Claude is at 500 million a year. How quickly do you think, what's a reasonable timeline to be able to catch those people?
I mean, I don't want to say per se because I don't know the answer. I think that it could come fairly fast, especially because like a lot of the biggest users for this are like mid-sized enterprises that like cannot use these proprietary closed source stuff for compliance reasons. I don't know. I think if we had a product that's better than them and we're not there in a year, we've done something very wrong.
Okay. And then on a personal note, why Ridges? Why did you decide to spend your time trying to make human coders obsolete? Why is this your target? You're 21, you could do anything in the world. Why'd you pick this?
I mean, I switched from like dentistry towards programming because I preferred it. But it seems like then like 2 years later, I'm like rug pulled. I'm just like, oh shit, like this career is just going away. So it's like, okay, well, it's gonna go away anyway. May as well like kind of like me be the one to make it go away. I think it's one of the very clear solved use cases of AI. And it's something that I'm very personally impacted by. And so it's like I have like domain knowledge here. I feel like I can probably like give it a shot to like kind of participate and like actually implement the replacement of myself. And then beyond that, then I've got like a lot more free time.
That leads perfectly into the next question I have. When you make human coders obsolete, you got a lot more free time.
Yeah.
What do you think are the new jobs or roles that are open by making human coders obsolete?
Um, it's a great question. I think that like the most coders would probably just go into like other jobs similarly because like I believe there's like in like a huge power law in terms of like the people that drive things forward. And so I feel like if you're like a 10x programmer or someone that like just has like a lot of vision when you code, you'll probably just use these tools 10x more effectively than the next person. And like we'll actually be able to like harness them and because it's almost like giving like a toddler a machine gun where like if you know how to handle it properly, you can do a lot more. But if you don't know how to handle it at all, you're not hitting anything. And so I think that like the majority of people will probably like splinter off into other fields and the people that are doing really well right now in software will just continue to do even better with these tools. Um, it's kind of bleak. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no one knows for sure what are going to be the new domains
Yeah,
that open up because of this. No one has a concrete conviction on something. But I'm
super
gonna ask you
unclear.
one last question here today, Shakeel. And that
Sure.
is, you've had a meteoric rise in the Bittensor ecosystem in 3 months, 4 months. What advice would you give to other subnet owners on how to be successful in Bittensor?
I think I'm ill-suited to give any advice in this regard because I'm still like super new to it. Um, yeah, I don't think I have any good advice in that sense. I guess just like talk to your miners would be the biggest one. Like a lot of the reason why we're able to do well, like well, all the reason we did well is because the miners just kept executing. And so our job is basically to like make sure they're not breaking the system and like kind of give them the tools they need to like do better. And so it's just like a lot of like just ask your miners for feedback, I guess.
let me ask you a different version of that question then. What
Yes.
advice would you have for mapping incentive mechanisms that can grow exponentially to Bittensor? How do you define a problem in Bittensor terms?
It's a good question. I like to think of BitTensor as like capitalism to bet, where like basically the idea is that like you take these same incentive structures that exist, but you remove all like the corporate fluff around it. Like for example, like within these companies that are competing with us, it's still like people working on the same things, but like they're not as good at it because it's like muddied by the same like kind of like incentives of like, okay, well, I have to impress my boss, or like I don't want to do too much, I don't want to outshine this guy. Um, and I think if you can like take this thing where like companies are already doing them pretty well, and like just take the core of what they're doing and distill it without all like the kind of corporate or politic like BS around it, you can probably do pretty well.
All right, Shakeel, always a pleasure
Cool.
talking to you, man. And I'm
Likewise.
sure
Thank you
you're
for
gonna have,
having me.
yeah, sure you'll have enough progress in the next 3 months to where you're back again. But I appreciate
Fingers
the
crossed.
time. Thank you.
That was good. Thanks so much, man.